Hello. Thank you for having me, us. I want to begin by acknowledging something huge, which is that at the end of last year, Katrina became the first female founder, CEO, to take a company public. Can we get some applause for that? Thank you. So what's it like on the other side?
It's been good. When we took the company public last year, it was a choice. This is a business that we turned profitable in 2014, so we were very lucky to have kind of multiple, I guess, options or paths available to us. And going public was one that we had always hoped that we would be ready for, and something that we hope we'd be able to achieve. And I think it's a journey. And I think the big reminder for me was that it can feel like this big momentous event, but the reality is it's just the beginning. And now we have these new investors, we have employees that we want to continue to generate value for. And it feels more like the beginning of a new stage than any kind of, I guess, end event. People call an IPO an exit all the time, and I'm like, this is not an exit. This is an entrance into
I'm still here.
It's like an entrance into the real big stage. And so it's been a humbling experience, but one that's made me better as a leader and made us better as a company.
I mean, I remember talking to you several times as you were going through the process, and I know you were pounding the pavement. Is it easier? Is it harder? Is it like a different kind of hard?
It's different. I mean, you get used to it, and it's in a lot of ways, it's actually not that different than the private market. Like in the private market, you build relationships with investors, and you're building trust, and you're getting people excited about your business, and it's the exact same thing in the public market at a different scale with different people. I think it's just different, and it's been a little bit of a learning experience, but I think one that's been really good.
So you've helped 2.5 million people discover their personal style. First you were focused on women, then men, you've got plus size, you've got pregnant. What is your vision for Stitch Fix today?
So the heart of what we do is about personalization. And so we get to know clients, we get to know products, we generate recommendations at the intersection of those things. And we're very good at that. And we've been able to get better at that over time. We shared that in our S1. And I think being able to enter men's, for example, was really exciting because we'd only done women before. And originally we'd only done women in kind of a narrow price point and a narrower aesthetic. And then now over time we were able to broaden and expand that. And then men is like a totally different customer and a totally different product. And within 6 months, we got that business to be as good at personalizing as the women's business. And so, so I think for us, being able to strip what we're doing down to just that personalization and not the other details, and to be able to demonstrate that that's extendable and translatable to new clients and new markets has been just some really exciting milestones.
So what is it with this Wall Street Journal story about 2 people possibly could get the same shirt? I don't understand.
So if I had $1 for every time I walked into a meeting and 2 guys in the room were wearing the exact same J. Crew shirt, but the reality is we're not about customization. We're not creating an individualized garment for each person.
Oh, you don't make it just for me.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, misconception. And so there are times when we might buy 10,000 of a navy dress, and it turns out that many people in this room actually would look amazing in the same navy dress. Very shocking. And so, there's been some, I think, confusion around personalization versus customization. And the other thing is 10 different people could wear the same navy dress and it could look totally different based on the styling. And so, our commitment is to kind of the personalization of making sure that we're sending you things that fit you well, that fit your style well. It may not be that you're getting something that is unique in the whole wide world, but I think our model is such that we're sending much more unique curated sets of things than anybody else is.
So I checked this morning, Stitch Fix's market cap is $2.25 billion. Not too shabby. The stock's gone up, the stock's gone down, it's coming back up, as stocks are wont to do. I did an interview with a female founder who also runs a public company with many public company competitors, and she said to me, I totally think my stock price would be higher if I was a man. Do you think your stock price would be higher if you were a man?
First and foremost, the focus that I have is on the stock price long term. And so, I think we're not focused on the daily fluctuations and really focused on ways that we can deliver value and make sure that 4 years from now we can look back and say we were doing all the right things. And I think I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, I think there are some things that are just more challenging. Being a woman with, and I think more specifically, being a woman and kind of the network that I have is the way I would characterize it. And so I don't think there's a direct correlation where it's just because I'm a woman the stock price is lower. But does it mean that when I walk into a room with new investors that I know fewer of the people in the room? Because if a man in my situation might have like a buddy from this or a buddy from that, and I'm looking at an audience that is still vast majority male. Is it harder for people to be excited about the business? Maybe. Is it, do I have fewer people who can be advocates on the investor side? Maybe. And so, I think there are some small things like that make it more challenging. But I do think there's been a couple things that have been exciting, I think, and one is relative to the VC world, which is a very low bar, I've met a lot more women investors on the public market side. And so I think that has been exciting, where I would say in the VC world, it's like single-digit percentages.
7%.
7%.
To be exact.
Exactly. Of the people you meet will be women. On the public market investor side, I would ballpark it at 15%. So still really low, but better. And let me see. Well, the other thing that, and I think that in general, people have been, I get a lot of feedback around me being an inspirational CEO to them. And the feedback that I get actually doesn't feel very biased, I guess. And I get a lot of, I think, positive feedback from that side. And so I think both of those things to me have created some reason for optimism.
So women-led companies get 2% of venture capital funding today. Hardly believe that's because women have 2% of good ideas. But I want to talk about how you got here, because it wasn't necessarily something you saw. Certainly the path was not carved. You carved it yourself. Did you think that you wanted to be an entrepreneur? So let me think. There's a couple questions in there. So one, it really, just to talk about the women percentage point, it really is pathetic how little money is going to women entrepreneurs. And I see a big part of the impact that I can have is that I can be like a visual representation of why you should back women. And so I think to be able to pander to the pattern recognition, VCs talk about pattern recognition all the time. And so to be able to at least create some capitalist reason that they should be paying more attention to women that they missed. So I raised I don't even remember the number anymore, less than $50 million in capital to build $1 billion business. There are many male entrepreneur peers of mine who have raised billions, hundreds of millions of dollars to build $1 billion businesses. Which are not profitable, and you were profitable 2 years before you went public.
Exactly. And exactly, and we have been profitable. And being profitable in a lot of ways was not a choice. I was either going to run out of money or get profitable. And that is not a choice that many male founders are having to make. And so, I think we were able to be successful and focus on building a healthy business and got to where we are. But the challenge of not having access or not having as much capital to start, I think, is very real. And so my hope is that as you see other exits, as people can look to Stitch Fix and remember, oh, I'm one of the 50 people that passed on that company and I didn't see it, and maybe I should open my lens and spend more time with this company that maybe I don't think I see right now. I think those little micro behaviors and changing those is something that I hope that I'm having a positive impact on.
So I do want to take a moment for you to tell your story, because it is very unusual, and so many people are wondering, how do I get there? Katrina plays a very prominent role in my new book, Brotopia, and so and it's a really important story. You were going to go to medical school, you took the MCAT, you went to Stanford, you'd see Mark Zuckerberg on campus. You never thought you could be him. You never thought that you could be an entrepreneur. Tell me how that changed.
So me becoming an entrepreneur was almost by process of elimination. I had, I almost thought about going to medical school. I was watching Grey's Anatomy on the plane last night, and I was like, wow, I am not cut out for that. So I'm very glad that I didn't go that path. I went into consulting. I loved retail, felt like it was super interesting, interviewed for a bunch of jobs at what I thought were progressive retailers. I almost took a job at Starbucks. Ultimately felt like, okay, these aren't interesting enough. And my motivation was I don't think the way that we buy clothes today is the way that we're going to buy clothes 10, 20 years from now. And I want to be at whatever company is doing that. And I was happy to join a company. I was happy to join a startup. And when I kind of wasn't able to find a big company to join, and then I worked at a VC for a couple of years, and I didn't find a small company I wanted to join. And I realized, and in VC, I met hundreds of entrepreneurs, and I realized all these people are just as unqualified as I am. And like, this is something I can do. And so with that, I realized that I could be an entrepreneur myself. If I had these crazy ideas about what retail should look like, I could do it. And so my risk-reduced way to do that, my mom is a public school teacher. She just retired. My dad is a doctor in the public university system. And so I come from a very risk-averse household and background. And I went to business school as kind of my way to be able to risk-reduce starting a company. So I went to business school, and I said, my goal is by the end of this, I'm going to have founded a company, be backed by an investor, be paying myself a salary, be paying down my student loans the day I graduate. And if I can't do that, then I'll have an MBA from Harvard, and I'll be able to have these great opportunities. And so that was kind of the approach that I took. But to your point, I think a lot of especially then, and now my hope is that it's changing, but the people that were role models as entrepreneurs when I was growing up were
coded in their basement in their hoodies.
Coded in their basement, dropped out of college, were just this person that like I didn't relate much to, and I certainly didn't see myself in. And so, I feel very fortunate that I stumbled into being an entrepreneur, and I think I'm pretty good at it. And, I think my hope is that there are many other people out there who may not have thought this was their primary career path, but can realize there may be a way to do that in a way that matches your risk profile, in a way that you can feel like you can be successful in doing the right things. And
now, when you did start raising money, you had some early believers. When you were raising your Series B, I believe there were like 50 people who said no. And how did you find the motivation to keep going? How did you know that? Sometimes maybe it's best to like change the idea, but you didn't.
Yeah, we had the 50, I wish I had kept count. I probably could go back and keep count. But in the seed round, I had one, Steve Anderson, who's still on our board, who's amazing, and he was immediately a believer. And there were probably a dozen or 2 dozen other people at that point who said no. And then there are dozens of other people who would say no along the way. The thing about our business that was crazy was that the product market fit was so strong that we spent virtually nothing on marketing for the first 4 years. And so the business was growing like this. And so I could always get confidence from the client side, because the clients were always there. The clients were loving it. The clients were waiting, in some cases, 60 or 90 days to get a fix.
And they happen to be women. And most of the investors happen to be men.
That's true too. And so the business was so strong that it was impossible to look at it and say like, this isn't working. Like, even when investors were saying no, you talk to clients, you look at the business, and it was working. And so if we could just figure out a way to get profitable, a way to be less dependent on what VCs think of me or the business, I felt really, really like rationally strong that this would work. And so I never lost confidence in the business, and it's really because of the kind of the strength and excitement and the women clients that were supporting the business and were demonstrating strong product market fit. And so I think that always gave me confidence, even when there were fewer people on the other side of the table that had that confidence.
Now, I think so much of what you have to offer is sort of helping women navigate the good things and the bad things. You and I have talked about how in the early days you heard Chris Sacca talking about his hot tub parties at a conference, and how this was a great way to bond with entrepreneurs, including Travis Kalanick, who had, incredible stamina in a hot tub. I think he can last up to 8 hours. As a young female founder, you hear that, and like, what do you think?
I heard that after I was kind of past the seed fundraising thing, which was probably good. But I heard that probably, I think I was pregnant, so I would have heard it like.
So certainly she couldn't get in a hot tub. You can't get in a hot tub when you're pregnant.
I think I was like literally pregnant at the time. I was like, I actually can't drink the beers that you're offering in your hot tub, and you definitely don't want to see me in a bikini right now or any kind of swimsuit, and I actually can't physically go in your hot tub. But it was just kind of. it was a little bit depressing because it's just, I think there are a lot of, we can talk about the really bad things that are happening, the Me Too things and the things that just like the harassment issues that table stakes shouldn't be happening. But I think the harder part to fix is this bias that happens in the how people meet and how deals get done and how teams are built. And so the reality is that a lot of VC deals, a lot of M&A, a lot of fundraising is happening in these very casual environments. And I think there are some benefits to that, but there's a lot of inherent bias in that. And so there's a lot of, for example, there's a lot of conferences that are kind of like boondoggly that like lots of the VCs go to, and it's a place where the founders go to. And like I've gone to a couple of them, and by and large, they're mostly men. They all know each other really well. They go to the same things every year, and it's really hard to break into that. And I think as a mom of a toddler, it's really hard to prioritize time to say like, I'm going to spend a weekend going on this boondoggle rather than spending time with my family. And so there's just a little bit of inherent bias in that. Like the conference itself isn't wrong. The conference may even be inviting equal proportions of women and men. They're usually not. But like even if they were, the fact that that's where deals get done, there's inherent bias in that. And so that, I think, that systemic kind of how do you change, like the way founding teams get built, and maybe you're going to ask a question on diversity, but
just maybe.
One of my major bones to pick around diversity is actually like, let's like take it back to the founding team. If you look at founding teams and how few founding teams have women in them, it's because founding teams, especially if somebody's a repeat entrepreneur, even if it's a first-time entrepreneur, people are usually drawing from their network when they're building the founding team. And so they're saying, oh, my buddy, we worked 2 jobs ago at this, he'd be a great CTO. Oh, like my friend from school, he's been doing this cool thing, and so he'd be great at product. And like that's how those teams get built. And they're not built in a way that is like posting a job and trying to figure out who's most qualified on the planet to do that job. And so even just like that very first step of how you build the founding team, and then they're recruiting from there, and they're looking at their networks, and they're saying, oh, I know this guy, and I know this guy. And now all of a sudden you have an early stage team that's like 12 men, and most of the economics are going to be in that early stage when a company is successful. And then the whole cycle repeats itself. Because if you're one of the 12 first people at Facebook, then it's going to be really easy for you to start another company, raise money. And so there's this cycle that's really, really hard to break, that's really kind of around this network and who they are.
So one more question, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience. You had your own Me Too moment. You had an issue with one of the investors in Silicon Valley who was recently exposed, Justin Colbeck. You can't legally talk about it because of these things called NDAs. But I'm curious what you think about all of these other Me Too stories, and whether, and how sort of that experience and being part of that has changed you or had an impact on you as a leader.
Firstly, I'm so proud of all of the people that have stepped forward, and it's just an incredibly hard thing to do. Like you think about in venture and in lots of other industries, these are small, tight-knit communities where like this network thing really matters. And so this idea of stepping out and taking a stand it's really hard. And I'm so proud of all the people that have. I think it's really exposed a lot of things that, lots of us have known in whispers, like you probably knew, like I probably, there's a lot of things that are whispered over the years, and I think depressingly, they just kind of become the norm. And so the fact that I feel like there's been this sea change conversation that's really changed this from like something that you would talk about in the bathroom with your girlfriends and be like, oh, that's so gross, to being like today, being like, wow, like that is wrong and that person should be fired. Mm-hmm. And like that's actually like a different, like I'm embarrassed to say that there are times at brunch where I would hear like some things my girlfriends went through and you're like, ooh, that's so gross, what a disgusting guy. But you weren't saying like, oh my gosh, you should like go to the press or go to your head of HR and get that person fired. And like I think it's really changed the conversation around what we expect in norms, and I think also the way that people, from a self-awareness perspective, knowing what, I guess, how people think about what their behavior is. And so I hope it's changed a lot, but I do also think it's table stakes, and I think unfortunately even if we get to a place where harassment is totally not an issue, I think there are still things around bias and systemic bias that are things that we still need to solve.
So that said, we have a question from Gina, and I think I know which Gina this is. Do you think women entrepreneurs are finding money outside the institutional patriarchy?
The institutional patriarchy.
Well,
do we
so
call this
look, we talk
VCs?
about, I believe, yes, and I think All Raise is probably a good example, and there are some women out there starting their own funds and running their own funds. I hope everyone saw the cover of Forbes last week with a lot of amazing women on the cover. Are female founders like yourself, are those opportunities for them?
I hope they are, but like the bigger challenge is really, like my biggest funders and my biggest supporters are men, like Bill Gurley and Steve Anderson. Like it's embarrassing to say, but I pitched to many women who also said no. And so, my hope is that it's not just like, oh, women are the only ones going to be investing in women. Like, we need to be able to change the institutional patriarchy. And I think for me, I focus a lot on things that are based on market dynamics and capitalism. Like, venture investors are venture capitalists. If you can appeal to the capitalist in them, if they're going to feel like I'm going to miss out on higher returns, I'm not going to be able to find the next Stitch Fix if I don't change. Like, that's a really powerful motivation to change. And so, while I do think I certainly see a lot more kind of outside institutional patriarchy place sources for funding now than there were when I was raising money in 2011. But I don't think that can be enough. Like, I think it really has to change where all of the most of the dollars are.
So Bill Gurley is, obviously one of the most successful investors ever, and he always says you have to play the game that's on the field. And I like to add to that, play the game that's on the field, but try to change the rules of the game as you go. And so, for the women in the room, and men, if there are any, what is your advice on what to do and what not to do, knowing that, yes, things are changing, but there are still challenges. There is still patriarchy. There are still these entrenched networks, as much progress as we've made in the last 6 months.
Yeah, I have a bunch of suggestions on this front. And actually, I don't know that I've heard that quote from Bill, but I love it.
He's told me so many times. I don't think I've ever told him my, interpretation of it. But.
Yeah, no, I really like it. I think a couple things, and I think many of us as founders in the room can do this. So one, I think especially, maybe not as many male founders, but I do think male founders just need to have a greater awareness around how they build founding teams. I have said what I said to male founders, and they've been like, oh my God, you're right. And I think there's just not an awareness around how that bias gets created in those hiring from your network stages. Taking a market-based pay approach. So we use an outside firm. You don't even need to use an outside firm, but we use an outside firm to help us to be able to understand what is market for this role, and we stick to that. It's hard. It means sometimes you lose candidates. It means that you might have somebody who comes to you and is like, I'm getting paid X and you're only going to pay me Y, and you might lose that candidate. But what it does is it helps you to reduce bias. There was a time when I had a woman who we were hiring, and the market pay was literally, it was about 30% higher than what she was currently getting paid. At a normal company...
The pay gap in Silicon Valley, by the way, is 5 times the national average, just so you know.
And so she came in, and normally you would ask a candidate, and California is now illegal to do this, but normally you would ask a candidate kind of what their pay is, and then maybe you would offer them a little bit more. Or maybe they'd negotiate, and they'd say, I'm already getting paid this, and I expect 10% more, so this is where I land. So what you're doing if you play that game is you are supporting the bias that everybody else around you has. And so in our case, it was really weird, honestly, for us to offer her for the same kind of role that she was coming from, a compensation package that was 30% higher than where she was coming from. And in fact, we probably could have gotten her for just what she was already getting paid. But we made that hard choice because otherwise we're doing the same thing everybody else is doing. And so a market-based pay approach, I think, is really important. I think the other thing is to ask your partners and your vendors and anybody where you have influence, ask them about diversity and their commitment to diversity. So when we were working with investment banks, with lawyers, we asked them for diversity statistics. And we don't say this is the primary decision criteria, but they actually then have to go and they have to talk to their senior management, and they have to expose statistics that they're not always comfortable with. And we're creating this conversation where they're having to go and ask, why is this true? What are we doing to change it? And so I think in an RFP process, including that is super important. And then the last thing that's like, it is related to Bill, is just like, we have a voice and we have influence. Like, there are people who are making really important decisions, in my case, Bill Gurley, who, you know, I have some influence with and who I can talk to about these things.
And you emailed him about Uber during the Uber thing and said, you know, I think you could be doing more.
Right, and so I told him, this is take it or leave it. This is my opinion. Do what you wish with it. But you know, I think my voice combined with others, like, it has an impact. And so, so I would encourage people to use that and use it to help to motivate change around you.
Well, and thank you for using your voice with us today. The clock is like yelling at me, but I do have one more question, which is, do you think we're at an inflection point? Do you think things really are going to get better? Is this a movement, or is this a moment?
I really believe it's a movement. And I mean, I get, like, it makes me feel so old, but I'll get like a fresh-faced 25-year-old entrepreneur who like comes to meet me and is so optimistic and so like excited, and she's just 10 years younger than me, and I was fundraising just 7 years ago. And you know, she'll say like, I read Brotopia and I just like, I can't believe what you guys had to go through, as though it's a totally different generation. And I love that. I'm like, that is so awesome that you can't believe that this happened. And so I really do think that just in a short period of time, at least there's greater awareness, and it really does feel like we're at the beginning of a lot of real action and change.
Katrina Lake, everybody, thank you so much for using your voice to help the next generation of women entrepreneurs.